Los Angeles, 1947. A city wrapped in fog, neon lights flickering against wet pavement, newspapers soaked in ink and rumor. In the vacant lots, between new developments, something darker was taking shape, something that would embed itself permanently into American history. A young woman would be found brutally murdered, her body staged with precision and cruelty so deliberate that even hardened detectives were shaken. Her name was Elizabeth Short. The press would call her the Black Dahlia. More than 70 years later, her killer has never been identified. In this video, we investigate one of the most infamous unsolved murder cases in United States hysteria crime, so meticulously executed, so publicly taunting, that it continues to haunt investigators, historians, and true crime researchers to this day. Everything you are about to hear is real, documented, and still unresolved. Before we begin, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to our channel, and if you enjoy this type of video, please leave a like. This motivates us to bring you more mysteries and true stories. The morning of January 15, 1947 began cold and brittle, the kind of Los Angeles dawn where a pale mist clings low to the sidewalks before the sun burns it away. At around 10:30 a.m., a young mother named Betty Berzinger pushed her baby stroller along South Norton Avenue in the neighborhood of Leimert Park. The tract homes were quiet, identical in their post-war symmetry. The empty lot beside the sidewalk looked no different from dozens she'd passed. Then she saw it, at least. She thought she did. At first, Betty assumed it was a discarded mannequin. Pale, stark white, split cleanly at the waist. It lay posed, almost intentionally, in the short, dry grass. But as she drew closer, an unease crawled up her spine. The eyes were open, the lips torn into a grotesque smile, and the body. It wasn't plastic. It was a woman. Her skin blanched from blood loss, her limbs arranged as if someone had gently decided exactly how she should be found. She had been cut completely in half. There was no blood at the scene. Not a drop, meaning she'd been killed elsewhere, washed and displayed. Betty ran. She didn't look back. Within an hour, police swarmed the location. Detective Harry Hansen and Sergeant Phineas Brown, two of the most seasoned investigators in the LAPD, stared at the scene in grim silence. They had seen murder before. This city produced more than its share, but nothing like this. The body was mutilated with surgical precision. The bisection between the lumbar vertebrae was clean, almost clinical. Ligature marks dented the wrists and ankles. Sections of flesh had been removed, and the face carved from ear to ear, widening the mouth into a permanent, horrific grin. Investigators would later admit something they rarely said aloud. It looked like the work of someone who understood anatomy and enjoyed displaying it. The victim was on no purse, no clothing, no clues, just a woman arranged like a morbid exhibit in a city that devoured mysteries. But the killer didn't just leave a body. He left a message in silence and spectacle. It wouldn't take long before the press found her name. Elizabeth Short, 22 years old, a dreamer who came to California searching for something brighter. Instead, she became a legend written in shadows. And with that, the Black Dahlia investigation, the largest in LAPD history, began. Before she became headlines, before the morbid nickname, and the sensational circus that followed. Elizabeth Short was a young woman adrift in post-war America. Born in Boston in 1924, she grew up believing in the possibility of something better. Her father abandoned the family during the Great Depression, leaving her mother to raise 5 daughters alone. Elizabeth, fragile in health due to chronic respiratory issues, spent much of her adolescence in movie theaters, breathing in the dreams projected on the screen. By 19, she drifted between Florida, Massachusetts, and California. Friends described her as soft-spoken, oddly formal, with a habit of dressing in black outfits accented by red lipstick. Some remembered her as mysterious. Others thought she was simply lonely. She had no stable job, no close family nearby, and Los Angeles, with its glittering promises and predatory shadows, swallowed women like her with frightening ease. Her last months were a blur of cheap hotel rooms, borrowed couches, vanished acquaintances, and broken plans. Investigators would later map her wandering path, but none of it pointed clearly toward the person who would eventually take her life. And yet, Elizabeth wasn't invisible. She kept journals. She wrote letters. She had dreams that made her vulnerable. When detectives reconstructed her final days, they found a woman teetering between hope and despair, surrounded by people who barely knew her, and traveling through a city where strangers could become predators in an instant. The most haunting truth was this: Elizabeth Short wasn't living on the edge. She was living in free fall, and someone watched her long enough to know it. As the autopsy report circulated privately among investigators, a chilling picture emerged. The killer had spent hours, possibly days, with her body. There were signs of restraint, signs of movement, signs of intentional posing after death. The mutilation was not random, it was calculated. The press pounced. They named her the Black Dahlia, twisting her image into noir mythology. Reporters harassed her family, invented rumors, and published photos stolen from police files. It became the media's perfect storm: a beautiful woman, a gruesome murder, and a city already simmering with post-war anxiety. Detectives were under immense pressure. Politicians demanded results. The public demanded a villain. And Los Angeles, a city where corruption often seeped through the cracks, wasn't prepared for what would come next, because the killer wasn't finished taunting them. The morning of January 24th, 1947, barely 9 days after Elizabeth Short's body was discovered, a small package arrived at the office of the Los Angeles Examiner. It was addressed in careful block letters, as if crafted by someone who wanted their handwriting to reveal nothing. Inside was a collection of items that froze investigators in place. A birth certificate, business cards, a social security card, personal photographs, and scraps of paper-bearing messages assembled from magazine cutouts, a style disturbingly reminiscent of ransom notes in crime novels. At the bottom was a single statement: "Here are Dahlia's belongings." The fingerprints on the envelope were meticulously wiped clean, but not perfectly. A partial print was retrieved. For a brief moment, the LAPD felt the first surge of hope they'd had since the discovery of the body. But then the unimaginable happened. Before the print could be analyzed, it was accidentally destroyed, contaminated, rendered useless. Even within the department, some whispered that it wasn't an accident at all. The package wasn't the only message. Over the next several days, police received dozens of calls, confessing to the murder. The majority were obvious hoaxes, attention seekers, unstable individuals, or those hoping to briefly own a headline. But a few voices stood out. A bellhop who knew disturbing details, a drifter with medical training, a man who had once been engaged to Elizabeth, a soldier who vanished days after the murder, a nightclub promoter with a violent history. The list expanded until it included more than 150 suspects: actors, surgeons, bar owners, soldiers, con artists, even women. Some suspects seemed almost too perfect. Others felt like diversions orchestrated by someone who wanted to stay hidden. Detectives Hansen and Brown worked around the clock. They interviewed every person Elizabeth had spoken to in the final 2 weeks of her life. They traced her movements across bars, diners, train stations, and bleak downtown rooms. Each led twisted into another dead end. But quietly, very quietly, one category of suspect began to concern them more than any other. Doctors, the manner of bisection, the precision of the cuts, and the way her body had been drained and cleaned suggested a level of anatomical expertise few civilians possessed. The autopsy surgeon stated bluntly, "This was the work of someone with medical training, possibly extensive medical training." One suspect quickly rose above the rest: a brilliant but deeply troubled physician with ties to Hollywood, connections to criminal figures, and a home located minutes away from where the body was found. His name appeared in the files, but publicly, his identity remained obscured for decades. And even as investigators pressed forward, something darker began happening behind the scenes. Evidence vanished. Witness statements changed. Certain names were quietly removed from reports. In a city where corruption often slid beneath polished surfaces, the question began to surface. Was someone protecting the killer? Or worse, had the investigation been compromised from the very beginning? By late 1947, the Black Dahlia case was no longer just a murder. It had become a maze of power, secrets, and the kind of fear that lingers in the walls of a police station long after the detectives have gone home. But the real truth, was about to slip even further from reach, because some of the most promising suspects were about to disappear forever. In the decades that followed, one suspect would rise repeatedly from the shadows of the Black Dahlia investigation: Dr. George Hodel, a highly intelligent physician, fluent in several languages, and once a prodigy in the medical field. Hodel lived in a striking mansion known as the Soden House, an architectural labyrinth of stone corridors, hidden alcoves, and unsettling acoustics that made even visitors feel watched. It stood only minutes from the location where Elizabeth Short was found. Rumors swirled around Hodel, rumors of parties filled with Hollywood elites, rumors of experiments, rumors of young women brought into his orbit and never fully escaping it. Hodel's own son, decades later, would accuse him publicly, not out of vengeance, but out of a belief that the evidence pointed unmistakably to his father. But long before that accusation surfaced, the LAPD had already started watching Hodel closely. In 1950, the department placed covert microphones inside the Soden house. For weeks, what they captured remains one of the most chilling pieces of audio in the Dahlia case. To this day, fragments of the transcript circulate among investigators and journalists. Suppose an eye did kill the Black Dahlia. They can't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead. A statement that should have been enough to trigger an arrest. But something happened. Something investigators still argue about. Hodel left Los Angeles abruptly. The surveillance abruptly ended. And before he could be arrested, questioned, or confronted, he vanished overseas for years. When he returned to the United States later in life, no charges were ever filed. And the files on him, the surveillance records, the internal assessments, the original interviews, quietly disappeared into archives, sealed and inaccessible, almost as if the city had decided the truth was too dangerous to confront. And while Hodel remains one of the strongest suspects today, the Black Dahlia case had other shadows, other figures who drifted near the edges of the crime. A violent ex-boyfriend who threatened Elizabeth before she died, a military surgeon with a history of mental instability, a man who stalked her at a bus station days before the murder, a group of young men who bragged about hurting her but later retracted their claims, and a mysterious dark-haired woman seen arguing with Elizabeth on her final night alive. Each suspect fit a piece of the puzzle, but no one completed it. As years became decades, something far more devastating happened. Files were lost. Photographs vanished. Evidence degraded or was destroyed. Some detectives believed it was incompetence. Others believed it was deliberate. The truth may lie somewhere in between, buried beneath political pressure, media interference, and a police department struggling with internal corruption during an era when power often silenced justice. By the 1970s, the Black Dahlia case had become a ghost, a symbol, a cautionary tale whispered by rookies in the halls of the LAPD. Some cases don't want to be solved, but the most unsettling chapter was still waiting. Not in the 1940s, not in the 50s, but in the modern era, when a new question emerged. What if the killer didn't stop with Elizabeth Short? And what if the Black Dahlia wasn't just a single murder, but part of a pattern that stretched across cities, victims, and decades? By the mid-1990s and early 2000s, cold case detectives and independent researchers began noticing something that earlier investigators had ignored, or perhaps simply couldn't see. Elizabeth Short's mutilation wasn't unique. Several murders across the United States, some predating 1947, others occurring years after, showed striking similarities. Victims posed in public locations, bodies drained of blood, surgical-level dissection, facial mutilation resembling the Glasgow smile, and, most disturbingly, a killer who seemed to relish the theatrical presentation of the crime. One case in Chicago, two in Cleveland, another in Texas. A possible link to the infamous Cleveland torso murders committed by an unknown butcher, the press called the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. Some investigators began to wonder, was the Black Dahlia killer nomadic? Or did he evolve from earlier crimes? Others believed the truth was even more disturbing. If the killer had medical training, he could have been a surgeon in one city, a military doctor in another, a researcher traveling for work, a ghost with credentials, someone who would never be questioned when found near blood, someone who could explain away wounds, tools, stains, someone who could dismember a body with speed and precision, someone who could easily hide behind authority. Over the years, new suspects surfaced, each compelling, each flawed, none conclusively tied to the crime. DNA testing, once seen as the great beacon of modern justice, proved in decades of contamination, mishandling, and degradation rendered most samples worthless. The LAPD quietly admitted a truth they had avoided for decades. No modern forensic breakthrough could solve the case unless new, pristine evidence surfaced, and none ever did. What remained were shadows of suspects, theories that contradicted themselves, and a city that had long moved on except for one part of Los Angeles where the desert wind still carries stories of a girl found in the grass, silent yet screaming. Today, the empty lot on South Norton Avenue is gone, replaced by clean sidewalks and quiet homes. Cars hum by. Children play, life continues, indifferent to the fact that one of the most infamous murders in American history once unfolded here. But for many, the true horror of the Black Dahlia case isn't the brutality of the crime, it's the ending. Because the killer, whoever he was, walked away, not into the shadows, not into legend, but into everyday life. He lived, he aged, he laughed, he breathed the same air as the families who unknowingly passed him on the street. And he died free, leaving behind a puzzle with missing pieces, a case file thick with contradictions, and a victim forever frozen in the cold January light of 1947. In the end, Elizabeth Short didn't just become a symbol of violence. She became a symbol of what happens when truth slips between the cracks of a city too large, too loud, and too fractured to hear it. The Black Dahlia files remain open, but the answers remain silent. Some mysteries survive not because they cannot be solved, but because too many hands have shaped the shadows around them. The story of Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, endures as a reminder that truth can be buried as easily as a body, and that justice sometimes depends not on evidence, but on who controls it. Thank you for descending with us into this chilling investigation. Tell us in the comments a topic you're curious about and want to know more about.